Got it all. Welcome to our briefing for our sideline match officials involved in the NPC and FPC this season. We do have a number of roles associated with these competitions. A few changes this year, not many. However, we will make sure we highlight those along with everything involved in all of our sideline roles. I'll be sharing this content out. I'll break it up into small parts so that you can review each part if you are appointed to any of those roles. But also you can watch it as a whole and understand what goes on across the board. Also, I'll share any associated documents as well and resources. So things like our sideline documentation, our booklets for the NPC and FPC, which has all the tournament, the tournament manual and breaks everything down as well. Now, while we do have these roles highlighted for NPC and FPC, we do have other representative rugby as well. So we have quite a mixture of grades and games, from provincial B games down to age grade under 18s and 16s as well. And we do service these games in different ways. A lot of these games are serviced in a similar way to Premier Rugby. So they'll have a referee, 2 ARs, and then a sideline manager. However, we're going to make sure that we do service these games as well as we can. And while you may not have all the bells and whistles at each of these games and all the people involved, certainly have a good understanding of each of these roles will help anyone involved in any rep game to deliver it as best we can. Essentially, we are here to serve the game and the community. So we need to make sure that those people who have been selected for these representative teams get the best possible experience as well from a match official's perspective too. So just going through the roles, particular for NPC and FPC and what they might look like if you're appointed to one of those roles. So sideline manager, what will pop up as a subs recorder on appoint me. Subs controller would be either subs controller 1 or 2. Reserve assistant AR would come up as bench official with a note on your appointment to say that you're a reserve AR. Same again for timekeeper, again bench official, and it will say timekeeper on your appointment, and water carrier as well is actually bench official, which I've missed out there. But just look out for sometimes there's extra information or notes on appointments that come through your emails for appoint me for these types of roles. I also send out a briefing document as well if you've ever been involved in NPC or FPC. In the few days prior to the game, there'll be a briefing document with all the logistics and everything for those games, as they do require quite a lot of logistics involved. So your role will be highlighted there as well as to where you have to be, what you have to do, what's involved, that kind of thing there, who to contact. If you are involved in a game and you don't if you haven't got the email for logistics and it's a couple of days out, make sure you do get in touch, because for an FPC and NPC game, it's not just a matter of rocking up. There are some logistics involved. Cool, we'll start with sideline manager. So our role for sideline manager at NPC and FPC essentially has the responsibility for everything that's happening on the sideline and all the movements. So movements on and off the field, how the non-team person, the non-playing personnel as well are functioning, and how they're operating, how they're behaving as well. So whether what they can do, where they can go. Also direction around where the reserves can warm up as well. That person keeps a record of player movements on a player movement summary form. So I happen to have one right here, and I'll share these out as well. But this is a completed one from the weekend with the Farah Palmer Cup. And there is the minimum detail required on the player movement summary form, which it has in the boxes, but there's also extra information that the sideline manager might want to capture as well for the referee, such as taking the score or any other notes around cards and things like that. They also control the sin bin as well against the official game clock, so making sure that they note down on here the time that the player goes off. And we also have a game innovation of a 20-minute red card as well. So making sure that they note down what time a red card is issued. And it's as simple as if it's at 23 minutes and 30 seconds, that means that that player for a yellow card, for example, can't come back until 33 minutes and 30 seconds. regardless of whether it's taken 20 minutes of actual day time to get there. So that's an important function for the sideline manager to record on their sheet. Our subs controller, so there is one sub controller assigned to each team. They do sit beside the manager of each team on the benches, not tucked in next to the sideline manager. So there is a bit of distance sometimes between them, particularly at the top of a domain. And there's a sky camera and everything in between, and a lot of people floating about. So it is, but it is important that they do remain with the team, as they are the first point of contact for the team manager, and should be interacting with them. So the subs controller should before the game make a point of establishing a relationship with the team manager. So they could check in with their sideline. They can check in with their sideline manager and go along and meet the team managers. Their team manager they're going to be working with, and just talk to them around how they're going to communicate. What are they likely? What's that person likely to do in terms of subs? Are they going to pre-mark the sheets and give them to them at certain times, or is it going to be more sort of on the fly? Establishing a good relationship and a good working relationship there is pretty key. Just around also because when it comes to setting expectations and setting standards, that if you haven't built up that, just like a game of rugby really, if you haven't built up that capital and that rapport with the players, or in this case the team manager, then it's very difficult to then actually get any action when you need it. So that's important. So the actual replacement process itself, so the subs controller will receive a subs card from the manager. So our subs cards, again, got some that are pre-filled out. They look a little bit like this. So it'll have the player coming off noted. In this case, it's number 5. Have the player coming on noted. In this case, it's number 19. It has, now, the interesting thing about these cards is that there's actually no space on here asking for which team it's come from. So it's often best that you do maybe pre-mark those, and that might be something you can get the manager to do before the game starts. It'll just help the sideline manager when they receive these cards as to know which was which. But they do have to make sure that they have ticked a box as to the reason for the replacement. It's a very important part, as it does dictate what that player can do later on in the game, if anything. Once you've got that information, you can program the players' numbers on and off into the digital subs board. I won't be able to go through a digital subs board here today. However, that is something that if you are new to the role or need a refresher on, you can always come into the office. I can take you through the subs boards, or definitely turn up nice and early, maybe even earlier than you normally would if you are doing that role for one of the first times, and have a practice and a play with the subs boards before your role starts. Subs boards are used for NPC and FPC. All FPC games are televised now as well. So it's important that we do get across those. The subs boards, however, are not the be all end all, and they are the value add in a way. So if the subs board gets in the way of getting a player on in a timely manner, then the subs board can be parked for the moment, get the substitution, the replacement done, and then you can pop it up just as it's being made. So that's an important consideration as well. But anyway, after usually you'll know, for most subs, you'll know in advance what is going to happen. So you receive that card from the manager, you program the number in. Once you're happy with that, you then hand the card off to the either the reserve AR in the NPC or the sideline manager in FPC, and then they'll go from there. Once it's coming close to the time, because it might be sort of pretty close, or it might be a couple of minutes away, once the time has arrived for the actual replacement to be made, you take the replacement player to the side of the field and you wait. So it's important that you take control of that player. It's only when you actually get the instruction from the either reserve AR or it could be the TMO as well, depending on how that role, depending on the relationship between the TMO and the reserve AR and how they delegate that. or the sideline manager in the case of there being no reserve AR or TMO. So once you get that instruction, then you hold up, then you send the player on and hold up the board. So as the player's running on, you're putting the board up. So you keep eyes on that replacement player. So not that replacement player, sorry, you keep eyes on the replaced player. So the player coming off, once you've identified where they are, you make sure you eyeball them all the way off the field and make sure they leave. It has happened too many times where the player ends up not coming off or not leaving the field, not usually on purpose, but essentially that sub-controller core role is to make sure that person gets off that field and that it is the correct number. So if that number is any different to what they provided you, you make sure that you go straight away and notify the sideline manager and work it with the team manager as well to make sure they got the right person. It's just a matter of changing the card, no problem. If they actually pull the wrong player off, then something needs to be done. So make sure that's sorted out ASAP. Yeah, so essentially keep that board up until that player comes off, lower the board and leave the touchline. Just on the boards as well, multiple subs can be programmed into them. So if you've got 3 subs coming on, you can pop that board up, you can pre-program them, and there's a little button that you press in it, and it'll rotate through all 3 that you're doing. The subs controller also has the responsibility of controlling, helping to control time. So essentially, we don't always just leave these tasks in the hands of one person. There's always at least 2 or 3 people that are, because it's so easy to sometimes forget to either start or stop a watch. So the subs controller has the core responsibility though for controlling blood bin and HIA time, because they know that it's their players that are coming off. The easy thing about blood bin and HIA is that it's actual time. So it's whatever's on your clock. If it's 3:15 in the afternoon, then the player comes off for a blood bin, then they can't go back on until 3:30. Sorry, apologies. They must go back on by 3:30 or be available to go back on by 3:30. Of course, that expires during half time. They had to come back on straight away in the second half. In HIA, again, once they leave that field, the clock starts for 12 minutes for them to be able to return to the game. So available to go on the field again. Of course, it might not happen within 12 minutes because you might be waiting for a stoppage, but they need to be available and ready to go. The subs controller also has a core task of controlling the reserves bench as they warm up. So you'll see quite a bit of this in the first half in particular, and they'll go for their warm-ups as to the where, the when, the what, and the equipment they can use. We'll cover all the detail of this a bit later on as well. And also to control the medics and the water carriers, particularly in that technical zone. It sounds easier than it is. But again, we'll cover off exactly what those medics and water carriers can do a bit later. The reserve assistant referee is typically appointed to NPC games and sometimes to Farah Palmer Cup games. So their role essentially is they are the replacement assistant ref. So if the referee or an AR get injured, then they're the ones that go on and become AR2. One of the subs controllers then becomes the reserve assistant referee, but they still carry out their subs controller duties. Certainly, I haven't seen two match officials go down in one game yet. Fingers crossed, touch wood. But it's important to know that there is someone else that has to be available to back up if it does happen. So the reserve assistant referee also acts as a bit of a link. They communicate all the player movements on and off the field, and time checks, etc., to the TMO. So they're that link between the subs benches, the subs controllers, and the TMO. The TMO will often be parked and busy. Sometimes they'll wander out, but often they'll be busy reviewing footage or just keeping tabs on things. So the reserve AR floats between the 2 benches and makes sure that the TMO is getting the information, because the TMO is the one that wears the comms vest in an NPC game on the sideline, because there's only 4 sets of talking vests. If there is no TMO, then a reserve assistant referee would wear that vest so that they are wearing one as soon as they're available to go on the field. So if they need to go on the field, to replace an injured match official. And they're the ones that then communicate with the referee. So if they do, as part of the replacement process, that reserve AR, they receive the sub cards from the sub controllers. They make sure that they are signed. It's important that they are signed, so that they're not just people just can't come back and say, oh yeah, it's just a made up thing. And they inform the TMO that the changes are ready. However, if there's no TMO, so in the case of the Farah Palmer Cup game, they stand on the touchline between the two tier middle lines and wait for a stoppage. And then they communicate to the referee substitution, and they wait, and then colour and number coming off. Just the colour and the number coming off the field. They don't usually really know who's coming on the field. It's important to know with stoppages as well, not to do it at a live stoppage, so where the game is still live. And what I mean by that is something like a penalty or a free kick where a tap can be taken. That is not a stoppage, but any stoppage where we have a scrum, line out, dead ball injury, or time's blown off for any other reason, then those stoppages are good times to do substitutions. Once that acknowledgement from the referee comes through, then the subs controller can let the players on. And again, the reserve AR stays on the touchline until they've also cited the players coming off the field. So you've got two sets of eyes at least on the players coming off, checking the numbers on the back of their shirts, making sure they match up, and finishing with substitutions complete. Then the referee will blow time back on. That last bit's quite important because sometimes otherwise the referee will stand there faffing about waiting for subs to be complete and then have to ask the question, are subs done? So should we get that through as well? And the reserve AR, if it's at a try, then they can just in conjunction with the subs controllers, they can just get the changes made. They don't have to communicate with the ref at this point. They only need to interrupt the game or interrupt the restart if the subs aren't completed yet. So just communicate through, just hold the game or stop the game, just finishing some subs, and so the referee will just hold the kicker. Often they'll still try and complete this with time on, otherwise they might call time off to get it all done. And then once you're done, hand the subs cards to the sideline manager. Timekeeper. The role of a timekeeper is often merged into the role of the sideline manager for Farah Palmer Cup games. However, it is sometimes appointed individually to that. So the timekeeper will have a listen unit, so they'll be able to hear everything that the referee is saying. So they'll listen to the referee's time on and time off calls, and they also need to watch the game because they may need to be a little bit, sort of a bit of a mind reader as well at sometimes of the referee. Referees are not always too flash, particularly at calling time back on. So they will just need to use some best common sense around when time actually is back on, and maybe if there actually was a time off call that wasn't called through, but clearly it is time off. So that is a balancing act a little bit sometimes with the timekeeper when if there's no clear communication or signal from the referee sometimes. So they do control the official time for the game. So make sure that there are stopwatches provided, multiple stopwatches provided, and the timekeeper may also have a role in either controlling the ground clock or liaising with someone to ensure that the ground clock is accurate. I know that the Tauranga domain in particular, the ground clock is sometimes used, and there is a controlling box for this, which there are many people around prior to the game that can help in using that piece of equipment. It can be used remotely. And it is important, again, to make sure that if it's a location or a role that you haven't done before, to turn up nice and early and seek absolute clarity around what it is your role is. Timekeeper should also communicate a 2-minute warning for the end of both halves. So if there's 2 minutes to go as they're coming up, communicate that through to whoever has the sideline communication. So that would either be the TMO or it could be the reserve AR or sideline manager in the case of Parapama Cup. And again, using the multiple stopwatches and pieces of timekeeping equipment that they have, they should be keeping backup time for temporary replacements, suspensions. So that's blood, HIA, red card, yellow card, things like that. Another person, again, keeping that time. So you've got at least 2 or 3 people keeping time for each of those events. So that, again, if something fails or someone forgets, then at least you've got 2 or 3 people who are across it. The water carrier. The role of the water carrier has, in spite of the new water laws, which we'll get to shortly, has not really changed at all. So the water carrier wears as much on-field kit as possible that we can provide them. And they have a chat with the referee before the game, find out what the referee wants and needs, find out to get the referee water bottle or water bottles or bottles of whatever they've made up, and understand their requirements throughout the game. At those times or at stoppages, but not penalties, again, not live stoppages. The water carrier will run the referees drink onto them. The word run is quite important, seeing as sometimes those stoppages don't last too long and we can't have water carriers dawdling out there or dawdling back, because it will A, deny the referee a drink, and B, sometimes you might get caught out being on the field and then time's getting blown back on, you have to run back to the bench. So make sure you run the water on and then offer the water to the referee. There may be some other sideline duties or just extra little support jobs that might be required. So the water carrier is also an important link to help the sideline manager. The water carrier sits next to the sideline manager and can support them there as well. So 23-person squads. In previous years, we haven't had 23-person squads for Farah Cup, but this now applies to all national competitions. So NPC, FPC, and Heartland are now all 23-person squads. This now has ramifications for uncontested scrums, as we would have seen very clearly in the recent Irish series with the scenarios that occur once we have to go to uncontested scrums. So for that, it is outlined in the NPC manual, which I'll send out as well and make available on page 58. But there is also a handy dandy grid and guide, which is available within the sideline manager's kit, and it is displayed here in front of you as well. So what it does show is what the first and what the second events are, and whether those events then cause a team to actually have to lose an extra player. The rationale behind this is that teams it was to prevent teams cheating or when they had a scrum that was being, I guess, dominated, particularly if they were down a person. So to prevent them from saying, oh, no, we've got an injured front rower now, we don't have any more front rowers available, so we had to go uncontested scrums. So essentially that was creating quite an issue. So what this does is this shows what you followed along, and it shows what the first event and second events were, and how many players should be left on the field at that time. So for example, if a yellow card occurs, and then so you get a front rower that goes off with a yellow card, and then you have a front rower that goes off as a head injury, and after that head injury, there are no more front rowers available. Not trained in certain positions to have contested scrums. If you have to go to uncontested scrums because of that, the team does not lose an extra player. So at that point, they are playing with 14 players, obviously, because they got a yellow card, but they don't lose an extra player. If there's a contact injury, So just a normal injury, for example. And then there's another injury. And so 2 front rowers get injured. And having both of those injuries causes those scrums to go uncontested. Then yes, there is a penalty, I guess, a penalty incurred for this, and not an on-field penalty, but the team is penalised in a way that they then lose a player. So these are just contact injuries, soft tissue, or whatever it might be. They're not because of foul play. They're not head. They're not blood. They had to drop a player if they had to force uncontested scrums there. And then if you get the scenario that we had in the All Blacks game where we had a red card, and then a yellow card. So red carded player, yellow carded player. So you got 2 players off the field anyway. You then have to drop a 3rd player. So if you go to uncontested scrums, you end up with 12 on the field, which didn't actually happen to the All Blacks. They managed to dodge that bullet for 2 minutes of the game. All right, the who and the where. So this talks about the water carriers, medics, and reserves as to where they can go, who is allowed to go where, and how many can they have. So for the medics, so there are 2 medics, and they can have up to 2 medics in both NPC and FPC. If they've got 2 medics, they can have 1 on each side of the field, and they may roam up and down the sideline. They must stay out of the way. They have designated roaming areas. They must stay out of the way of the camera people and the ARs. If they get in the way, they should be asked to move. So just keep a little eye on them as well. They can't be on the same side as each other. So often a medic might run off the side of the field, maybe the wrong side that they were on, but they have to make their way back around to the other side of the field if there's already one of their medics on that side. So they can't stack 2 medics on one side of the field. They can go on the field at any time in accordance with law. Law outlines when they can go on. If the player is injured, they can carry water for that player, but only for that injured player. They can't take water for any other player at all. And this is a key one because this one often gets infringed. They must not obstruct, interfere, or direct comments at match officials at all. They can't be chatting to they can't be yelling things out. They can't be asking the AR for things or questioning the AR or yelling things at the referee about what their opinion is about the match. If they're doing this, then this should be communicated to the sideline manager. And if it continues, then they should be removed. Water carriers themselves. Now, water carriers are not completely redundant, but they're a little bit redundant, and we'll talk about that shortly. So a team can have, in the NPC in particular, a team can have 2 water carriers. They operate from the technical zone only. They cannot roam at all. So they must be in their technical zone. They are only allowed on the field during the designated water breaks, which we'll get to shortly. At a penalty kick, they can actually carry a water bottle out there now at the moment with the team. But that water bottle can only be for the kicker. They can't provide water to anyone else in the team. And again, just like medics, water carriers have a habit for sometimes passing some comments at match officials, particularly if they're running water on for a kick or something like that. But they must not obstruct, interfere, or direct comments at match officials. And I have seen referees fire back at water carriers as well, even in our home games here. So again, keep tabs on this, particularly if you're a subs controller or a sideline manager. And if it happens, make sure you address it straight away. If it happens again, then that person gets removed from the game. For Farah Palmer Cup, it works slightly differently. Not all Farah Palmer Cup teams are resourced as well as NPC teams. And so the sideline rules are slightly different. So there can be a grand total of 4 people acting as medics and or water carriers. And the split happens like this. So you can have up to 2 medics, as outlined before. And if you have 2 medics, you can have up to 2 water carriers. 1 medic can be on the far side roaming. If you have 1 medic, then you can have 3 water carriers. And then you can have a medic or a water carrier on the far side. And if you have no medics at all, then you can have 4 water carriers, and one water carrier can be on the far side. Now, you might be asking the question, well, hang on, we're going to have water breaks now. What about those water carriers? Surely they can't roam. Yes, ideally. However, again, some Farah Palmer Cup teams do not have designated medics, so their water carriers will act in a medic type capacity. and may attend to injured players. So in that sense, they are treated like medics for that reason. But if they do carry water for those people, they only carry them for the injured player. They can't give water to any other player at any other time unless it's a water break. An assistant coach can be a water carrier, but they can't run on the far side. And also, again, just like NPC and medics, water carriers cannot obstruct, interfere, or direct comment at match officials. Water breaks. So this is a global law trial in 2022. It started on the 1st of July. It's only for 23-person squads, which is why you wouldn't have seen any communication around it or much shown about it at all, because it hasn't affected the community game at all. So a good summary of this is that, so the way this is managed at least is that the teams can keep a supply of unattended water bottles. So now you'll see water bottle crates probably sitting down in behind the dead ball lines. Refills for these must be undertaken in the tech zone or in the changing rooms. So you can't have water carriers going down there and spending ages trying to refill bottles down at the deep ball line, because chances are they're probably going to take some liberties with that as well. So if they want to refill them, they can take them back to the tech zone or into the changing rooms. Players may also go to the sideline. They can stop by the tech zone at any time to take water, so that any time during the game, stoppage or not, to take on water. The teams that are a little bit smart will put bottles down both ends of the field, so that if they're on attack and there's a stoppage, rather than having to trot all the way back to halfway for a drink, let's say they're attacking the opposition line, usually you'll just see the defensive team put their bottles there because they'll go behind the post at a score. But if the attack down there, they'll chuck a set of bottles down behind their line that they're attacking as well, and then get a drink if there's a stoppage. So that's the smart play for them, and they're allowed to do that. They can put bottles down both ends. The way that the on-field water breaks are managed themselves, they're limited to 2 per half, and the first one can't be so maximum of 2. The referee does not have to allow 2; it's up to 2 per half. The first one can't be within the first 15 minutes of the game, the first 15. It can't be within the first 15 minutes of the game. Sorry, itself. There should be a pre-match agreement between the managers. So again, this is probably something for the sideline manager to have a conversation with the referee about. It's the referee who really controls this. However, they may delegate this responsibility to the sideline manager to help inform them. Hey, in and around 20 minutes of the game, can you prompt me and again at 30, or it could be at 18 and at 31 or whatever. It's up to the referee as to how they want to manage that in the flow of the game. I've seen it so far. We've seen it done seamlessly, and we've seen it done really clunkily. And that's not no slight on the referees. It's just the way that the law is designed, and it's caused a few. It's a little bit unnatural sometimes. So the referee, however, they can still be supplied water. So the water carrier for the referee can run water on at tries. And the water breaks as well. They can run the water on then as well. But outside of those times, then the referee probably won't be wanting any water anyway, because the teams aren't getting it either. The reserves, so where they can warm up. All our home games this year have been played in Tauranga. So there'll be no warm-ups, no warm-ups parallel to the field. There is no space parallel to the field, and the teams cannot warm up on the running track. So in Tauranga, the teams must go down to the opposition's team in goal. They must remain between the 15-metre lines. So if you're looking up and down the field, so they must warm up between those 15-metre lines. And if play enters the 22-metre area, they must retreat behind the dead ball line. They can't take any equipment down there. So no equipment can be on either field. So no balls, no hit shields, nothing. And they must be sure not to obstruct the end on cameras. However, if they're remaining between the 15-metre lines, then they shouldn't be obstructing these cameras anyway. It is the responsibility of the subs controller to keep an eye on their teams, make sure that they're complying. Again, every year, all the time, teams will try and either flaunt the rules or won't know the rules. or claim they don't know the rules. So it's important that the subs controller is onto that and is has some I guess assert some authority here as well, in making sure the teams do what they should be doing. No one is above the rules or the competition rules, and everyone should be across them. So again, we'll cover off any issues as well. So dealing with issues. So usually the first issue to deal with is a warm-up area one, if one's going to pop up. So again, work with the team managers. Say, hey, look, you got to be between those 15 meter lines and down in goal area. You can't. It's usually an equipment issue. So, look, sorry, here at this ground, you can't take equipment. They might be coming from a stadium where they have plenty of space, like FMG Stadium, Waikato. They've got plenty of space to warm up on the sides and have equipment. Not in Tauranga, however. So teams may not be used to not having equipment. However, they can't take it. Those are the rules. So once you've broached it with the team's manager in a friendly way with that rapport that you've built, all good. If it still doesn't work, or if they're still repeating the behaviour, then involve the sideline manager. And again, sideline manager again to address this, be firm, be fair, and be very objective about what you're saying as well, and without being emotive. This way it can get solved with minimal match disruption. If it's still an issue, regardless of whether it's to do with subs or sorry, not subs. Well, it could be with subs. It could be about teams trying to run players on. It could be warm-ups. It could be water carriers. It could be comments that are being directed at match officials. Maybe ARs being sort of heckled or abused from water carriers or management. Usually the players are no problem. It's always the water carriers. But follow this process, and if it's still repetitive, but it's still ongoing, and it can't be resolved using this with the sideline manager, then in those exceptional circumstances where it's a repeated negative behaviour and that can't be resolved, involve the on-field referee. Essentially, they are in control of everything within the playing enclosure. So if there's an issue on the sideline that is just ongoing and it's not getting fixed, involve them. It's amazing how quickly it gets fixed then. And the number one thing as well is that abuse and poor behaviour directed at match officials is never acceptable. Okay, so it's actually really important that if there are issues, and particularly either ongoing issues or ones that are quite borderline, then no matter how minor you think they are, or it's like, oh, it's okay because they're an NPC team. It's like, no, it's not okay. In fact, if anything, they're held to a higher standard. So it's really important that you do actually report that to your sideline manager, and the sideline manager will then relay it to me. I get in touch with New Zealand Rugby. That poor behaviour is recorded and followed up. It's often, if it's quite minor, it still gets followed up, and it's often dealt with internally, and it's usually never an issue again. However, patterns and trends can be formed, and there have been cases of teams. In the case, 2 teams last year where some poor behaviour was reported back to New Zealand Rugby. They're like, this is the 3rd such incident in as many weeks. So they took some serious action via their CEO to remedy that, and it didn't happen again. So it is important, again, otherwise they're going to go from game to game to game, just repeating that behaviour if nothing gets done about it. It's the same for club rugby as well. So make sure that that type of stuff is put through. And lastly, game innovations. So these have been in place for the last couple of years as well. They remain in place as well at the moment. So a red card, a player can be replaced after 20 minutes. This is only in NPC and FPC. In Heartland as well. Again, so that play is done obviously for the game, but they get red carded, but they can have a replacement come on after 20 minutes of game time. And golden point. So if a match is tied after 80 minutes, then we go to 10 minutes of golden point extra time. All the details for each of those game innovations are outlined in FPC and NPC manuals as well, which I'll share out.